All right, what is going on, everyone? Let's get into this. We are still hovering at just under 10K. I made a joke this morning that everyone was all frustrated because they all had their 10K tweets ready to go. I know I did, but we'll keep an eye on that. But listen, everyone, welcome back to another 3 at 3. Thanks for hanging out. Sorry I wasn't here yesterday. Had some stuff that I had to do from before I had started this that was on the calendar, but this should be an everyday thing. I'm going to do Tuesdays through Fridays. So let's start over here. So today is the 2-year anniversary of what I think is a pretty famous crypto thread from Naval. He wrote about basically the idea that blockchains will replace markets with networks and how that's going to work. And so I kind of took this chance to look at the intervening 2 years, what's happened, how things have changed, and how our perspective on decentralization had changed. I think it's a particularly good moment right now as we get excited about 10K and as we talk about Libra, as we talk about the difference between permissioned networks and permissionless networks and what all these things mean. Like, we're kind of in a moment where, because the two forces that are mainstreaming the conversation of our industry are, on the one hand, kind of Bitcoin resurgent, or Bitcoin honey badger, depending on your perspective and how many of these bear markets you've been through, on the one hand, and then on the other hand, Libra, right, which is a very different phenomenon that's got mass scale. And I think it's an interesting moment to really think about where the different value propositions lie and how these things might fit together. And so I went back and looked at some of that. And one of the things that I wanted to do is see if Naval would update his sense of things. And so this is what he said. That I can't call timing, but it still feels way too early for the end game to me. So what he's referring to is his kind of concluding idea that blockchains are going to basically replace all the networks that we know, first slowly and then all at once. He says Bitcoin hasn't faced the final boss yet, and there are too many suspect tokens rising alongside indiscriminately. I'm not going to spend any time reading into which tokens or chains he's referring to in that second part. But I think this idea of final boss and crypto end bosses is something that is interesting, particularly in the context of what we're going to discuss in the next round, which is new new information from FATF, the Financial Action Task Force. Sorry, I was trying to think of the weird, crazy name that it was. So anyways, let's actually get into that one. So, okay. So first we'll start with the exclamation point, and then we'll go back and talk about what this means. So basically, the FATF is a international recommendation body created, I think, in 1998 around kind of cooperation around international money laundering, right? So it's a crime fighting force, really focused on things like terrorist financing. And they had kind of guidance today in the U.S. that this has been coming for a while. And so anyway, so when I was looking at the remarks by the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, I noticed that the language is pretty aggressive, right? So he says this will enable the emerging fintech sector to stay one step ahead of rogue regimes and sympathizers of illicit causes. We will not allow cryptocurrencies to become the equivalent of secret numbered accounts, right? So this is a pretty aggressive language. And I think that to some extent, you can maybe chalk this up to the idea that kind of if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? Like, this is a body that was assembled to focus on anti-money laundering and to focus on terrorist financing. So of course that's what they're going to see in it. But practically speaking, so this is basically there's recommended guidance, and what happens now is that member nations get to decide whether to follow that guidance or not. It's not binding, obviously, but at the same time, there are kind of social implications when it comes to trade rules, because this is about big flows of money. And so, nations that aren't really playing by the same set of rules as everyone else aren't super kind of like, it's frowned upon, right? So, specifically, basically, what this would do for cryptos is that exchanges would have to share information about the kind of people who are using cryptocurrency anytime it's moved between exchanges, which has some pretty significant regulatory implications. And so, on the one hand, we're seeing kind of this like pretty aggressive language, I think, which is undeniable. And then at the same time, you're seeing what feels like a lot more kind of restrictive policies coming into play, or recommended policies coming into play. And so, I'm always interested in like what's the, what besides the kind of the doomsday case, what's the actual thing going on. And so luckily the Coin Center wrote some things up. So basically they give the background, and they kind of break it down into good, irrelevant and kind of bad news. So the good is that basically they say that this is more of the same. And I think that's a thing that happens often is we hear about a thing for the first time and think, holy crap, it's bad, when actually it's just kind of been the rule of the land for a while. So their middling is, and this is really hard with all of crypto, is that it's not super clear who's supposed to be regulated or not. And I know we're done on that countdown timer, but I'm going to go on for just a minute longer on this one because I think it's important. And by the way, for anyone who's hanging out, we've been having some trouble with the chat connecting on Periscope. So if you're on Periscope, do me a favor and try to send a chat message, just a hey or a yo, just so we know. So if not, I can get it worked out with Restream. Okay, cool. So basically, they're noting that the the definitions are not standard. They're unclear, right? So it's exchanges are definitely called into question, and it seems like individuals are not, but at the same time they're using terms effectively that they made up, right? Exchangers and virtual asset service providers, these aren't like terms that we use in this industry. And so I think a lot of the devil comes in the details of where those definitions get drawn, especially when we have so many new types of structures like decentralized exchanges that just aren't really going to fit into anything. So I think for me, this is reflective of, I think the Coin Center is probably right that it doesn't necessarily reflect some big new departure. However, I think that the overall sentiment that I'm feeling is a growing kind of state reaction to the continued persistence of crypto, right? There's this old, someone, I can't remember when it was, but someone had this cartoon that was like an old New Yorker cartoon of people in a boardroom. And they said, the cartoon caption says, our strategy of just hoping that Bitcoin goes away on its own doesn't seem to be working. And I feel like that's kind of what's happening with regulators around the world. And I think that probably this Libra stuff is a catalyst for that. But I think that they are cracking back a little bit. And I think that the next period is going to be really, really important to see, what we're up against, how we have to fight. And this again goes back to kind of Naval's question about the big bosses and how have we fought them and what are we up against. And so I guess with that, like one more thing that I wanted to talk about is actually in the context of Libra and in the context of privacy and compliance with all of these regulatory bodies. So if you'll remember, on day 2 of Libra, we looked at kind of the second day narrative was this idea that maybe it'll never even make it, kind of off the website, so to speak, because it'll just be kind of pre-regulated out of existence. It won't be able to comply in a way that gets the green light, and it just kind of won't happen. And it seems to me that since then, and this is, kind of probably what they have to do, Facebook has been on a PR kind of offensive to try to get more sentiment space to be more open, right? They're not cracking back hard against someone like, the U.S. Congresswoman who is telling them to halt things. They're trying to educate more, right? And in particular, they are trying to educate in their way around this particular issue of privacy and illegal activity. And so this is, fundamentally the tension for regulators. And let's just put ourselves in their seats for a moment and kind of understand that this is not the world that they live in. On the one hand, they have a responsibility to the privacy of their constituents' data and information, which is kind of what the war drums against Facebook have been about. And yet, on the other hand, they have a responsibility for the security of their constituents to be able to fight crime. And information flows and the internet are a place where that's a key aspect of fighting crime now is what lives there. And so they're stuck between the rock and a hard place of surveillance on the one hand and security on the other. So it's not that I'm unsympathetic to the challenge. However, it is notable to see just how much this idea of the specter of illegal activity is going to be used as an argument against privacy. This already happens now. This is the classic counter argument against privacy, which is, you don't need privacy unless you're a criminal, or you don't care about privacy unless you're a criminal. That's been used forever. But you're seeing it now in terms of the argument for kind of built-in privacy for crypto. So, whenever, again, you guys have watched me before know that whenever I see multiple people talking about the same thing, I kind of perk up and take notice. So you had Udi, both of these folks are commenting, by the way, on the same clip. Again, making that argument, privacy as a tool for criminals, and David gets into it, which I will say it's all compliments to David Marcus and to Facebook that he's out there actually engaging with these posts. I think that's really important, and I want all of us to contribute to that. I want that dialogue to be open. This is not a project that's going away, and it feels like at least these are some pretty good examples of that. But so I saw this, and then almost right after seeing that, I saw that that Zuko had also jumped in, and some of the folks from Zcash who are doing their annual Zcon right now. So what the point that Zuko's making is that this same data leakage that allows law enforcement to trace criminal activities would also allow Russian espionage agencies to trace our citizens' activities. Basically, that like when we create backdoors, when we don't deal with privacy, it's everyone has access to those benefits, and it's often the most nefarious parts of society who are going to be best equipped to take advantage of the loopholes that we leave open for law. So again, these are really challenging issues. These are really important conversations. But just to make it really clear that this isn't just a philosophical debate about kind of the nature of privacy. Sarah Jamie Lewis makes this point that it's not it's not just a theoretical, right? Like if privacy is only for only an issue for criminals, then it matters who we've deemed to be criminals, and that includes a lot of groups like sex workers now, for whom this type of technology could just be totally destructive and much more dangerous. So I think that these are to me just some of the most important issues in the world right now, and I'm excited to see that we're talking about them. I like to see the Facebook Libra contributing to the discourse in this way and bringing these issues up and giving us a chance to talk about these things in real context, not just in theory. So it's exciting. So anyways, that's this for now. For those of you who haven't heard yet, it is the 1-year anniversary of LRS this weekend, so keep your eyes out for a little something special. And thanks for hanging out. And we're down. All right, guys, I'll talk to you soon.